Ivo asked if I needed a microphone, and I thought, no, I have one. Can you hear?
Yeah.
Can you see? First, I wanted to thank Ivo. And then all of you, almost everyone else, for being here, for showing so much. The Taitichuan like the Tao is the 10,000 things. And Confucius said, I give my student one corner, and if he doesn't find the other three for himself, I do not repeat the lesson. All of us maybe have had one corner, maybe two corners, maybe you're getting towards 4 corners. But that is what you are learning, and you learn different things. But how do we learn, and why do we learn, and what do we learn, and what are we doing here? All of us know this thing. Okay, so we have the yang, light, mountain, strong, yin, feminine, receptive, rally, and ever-changing changes, circling. So all these symbols we know. Oh, it's gone backwards. I'm sorry. Oh, it's gone backwards again. Yeah. So this is Lao Tzu, and we have. Okay, so we have Lao Tzu a long time ago, BC, and supposedly from him he came the many sayings of the Gala of XII, which is the basis of lots of what we practice, but maybe not what everybody does. And that's very important. When I let go of what I am, I become what I might be. And the Taitichuan is a lot about letting go. Letting go of lots of things in your body, in your mind, in your thoughts, in your character, in your aspirations. Let go of what you are to become what you might be. And again, Thomas was talking a lot today about the symbols, Bakwa, and the movements of within the Taitichuan, which you all practice as more of a martial art, internal martial art, like press, shoulder slide, go back, split, thunder push. But how do we know about these things? There is much in art that helps us think about yin and yang and the processes that go between, which is a wonderful piece of work from a bird going down to a fish, yin becoming yang, yang becoming yin, going on and on in Western art. But perhaps these are the type of images that we like to think about. Be still as the mountain and move like the river. And that's here we have man relaxing, just being in nature. So Taoism, if we think about the 3 major philosophies of China, Confucianism, Buddhism, Taoism, what do they give to our knowledge and our practice of the Tai Chi Chuan? And Taoism is particularly being one in nature. Looking at nature, understanding nature, bringing nature into yourself. And many of the symbols relate to nature. So different from Western thought. We have contemplative spirituality, perhaps in the West, but Christianity doesn't deal with a lot of those things. Christianity is a lot about sin. Taoism has no concept of sin. Taoism is how you live your life. And that's important. There's also perhaps some sin involved, but maybe not. And this one, again, just notice, ladies, men in the mountain, just looking at nature. Be still as the mountain, the yang symbol, and move like the great river, the yin symbol. I was talking about Christianity, and I don't know if you can see this wonderful place. The Dunhuang Caves are on the Silk Route at the end of the Taklamakan, the Gobi Desert, where all the routes met, taking things from India to China, from China to India, tea all over the place, gold, agate, precious stones, slaves, all kinds of things. And if you think this is 500 BC, there are men and women moving. Again, in Western iconography, what images do we have of people moving, using their bodies? In our forms of, I don't know what you are, creed, colour, gender, it doesn't matter. But if you have a Western thought, you know, our religion is very static, unless you have some ecstatic experience through the religion. But the religion is, and the philosophy is still. Here, they are twisting, they are doing all forms of qigong. It's wonderful. This is 500 BC paintings, fantastic, on the walls. And then they're doing all the things we do and you do there. It's the most wonderful, wonderful picture. And for some people, for your experience of Tai Chi, Tuan, or martial arts might be much more this, or this. Many of you practice these arts, and I admire you. So what's that got to do with my mother? Think back over 100 years. Think back what your family were doing over 100 years ago. Where were they? What were the women doing? Come on, ladies. What were the women doing? What were the women allowed to do? And what were the men doing? And this is a story from a little girl from Bergen in Norway. So my mother was Norwegian, and there she is with her mother and her grandmother. And she grew up in a loving family, and she grew up in a special place. So this was in her garden, at the back of her house. And so she saw forest. Her grandfather took her out to walk in the forest at night to not frighten animals. She looked at these images, and on a Christian church, she saw dragons. What are those dragons to do? And she saw movement. Those stave churches are very special. She had some complications in her family, and so she went off to find herself. And she went to America in the 1930s to explore herself. And her exploration was through dance. So she did dance. And then the war broke out. She was a Norwegian. She said, I have to go back to my country. So she took the last boat going back from America to Norway. And she said, I have to help my country. The Germans are invading. I must be there. And during that time, she was complicated, and she took a Reichian analysis, psychoanalysis. So we all know about Freud and dreams and sex and complications and hang-ups. Reich thought very much that all trauma and tension was held in the body. And you could see it in the body. And the way to release tension was through the body. So she was beginning to use dance for psychotherapy or movement to release tears, to release pain, to release anger. She had a lot of anger in her. She had to get rid of that anger through her body. But she was complicated. I mean, life was complicated, and there was the war, and where do your loyalties lie? And this was a picture by one of her boyfriends of where she was. I mean, crikey. That was quite complicated. You know, who am I? Am I fragmented? And maybe in your 20s you felt like this, maybe you didn't. Maybe you knew where your path was. Where were you going in your 20s? And this is in the 1930s. So where were women? Okay, this is a bit sexist, but where were women going? Where were women allowed to go? And what did they do? And she thought the best thing she could do, she moved to Oslo to carry on with her analysis and her dance. And she thought the best thing she could do was to join the resistance. And so she rejoined the Norwegian resistance and worked with a cell producing an illegal newspaper that went round. And there were two men, young men, who printed the newspaper, and she worked with another girl going round to places distributing the paper. And they were always in fear of the Gestapo, of people coming. And her own family home was taken by the Germans to live in, which was a nice house. So they were living there, and they had an illicit radio up in the attic where the Germans were. So she was working as this courier, and with her bicycle. And one night, she didn't usually do this, but one night she thought, oh, I must go and see if there's any milk. And so she went to the shop outside her place she was staying in a flat. And said, don't go in, it's got over there. And so she knew they been given instructions as the Germans came what to do. So she had, I think, 3 tins of tinned meat. And she had a rucksack, and it was midwinter, and she had a fur coat, because all good Norwegians have fur coats. And she went to a safe house where they were instructed to go. And they were told, okay, tonight there will be some people who will take you to the Swedish border. You have to go to the forest. So she went to the forest in the middle of the night, and sitting in a snowdrift with her fur coat and her rucksack. And this car went through this, hide, they're after us. And so she jumped back into the forest. And those men were caught and shot. And so she went back to her safe house and said, we don't want you. We don't want you, it's been busted. So she had very little, she stayed in the cellar, and she had very little food, because no one had any extra food. And eventually they said, okay, there will be another trip to Sweden. And this time it was a very important man, a judge, who was wanted by the Germans very much. And his wife had just had a hysterectomy. Not good, thrown up. And there were 2 small children. So they were taking a sledge. They were taking a sledge in the snow, skiing with and pulling the sledge, and were going to go across the border. But first, they had to go underneath a timber wagon. So there was a timber wagon going towards the Swedish border, and it had a false floor. So under the logs, there was all of them hiding. And my mother was told to kill the children if they made any noise. So she was told to smother them if they made any noise. And the Germans came and they prodded the wagon, and they were allowed to go. And so then they got out of the truck, the lorry, and they started to ski. There was a woodcutter who came, and he was taking parties across to Sweden, skiing. And so they all had skis, and they put the lady with a hysterectomy and the 2 children on the sledge, and they skied out across to Sweden. And as they left Norway, they sang the Norwegian anthem, Ja, vi elsker dette landet, so to speak of that. And the next trip, the woodcutter was caught and shot. And of her gang, the women went to Ravensbrück and the men were shot. And she thought, this is not good. I have to do something with this. So she stayed on in Oslo until the end of the war, doing her dance, and at At the end of the war, Count Bernadotte from Sweden brought back some of the prisoners of war, and he brought back many of the women prisoners. And my mother began to work with the trauma of these women and children who'd been in concentration camps. And she started with movement, a circular movement. And there was one little girl who had lost her parents and she was just traumatized. And my mother gave her a little pencil and said, just draw a circle. Just draw a little circle. She couldn't do this. Just draw a circle and make the bigger circle. And then she got her in the end to dance the circle and move the circle with a rope. So she could hold on to a rope that was safe and move around the room and begin to open again and then to cry. And she worked with many of the particularly women who came out of the camps who had had unspeakable times. So then what happened? Well, she went to England and she was invited to teach at the National Theatre, so teach movement. And so some of the people you may have heard of, Sir Laurence Olivier and John Gilbert, who are dead now, but were great actors. She taught them movement and how to move. But she then she had a boyfriend, and she was going back to Norway, and the boyfriend said to one of his friends, will you meet my girlfriend off the airplane in Stavanger? And he said, okay. And that was him, that was my father. And my father also had, that's a self-portrait, and he also in his 20s had many doubts, as you can see. Who am I? What am I? Where am I going? What has this war done to us? Who are we? What have we done to other people? And so he was confused too. But they married and were sent to China. So they were working with a import-export company called Jardine Matheson, who were Scottish. And they were taking oat cakes to China and silk to England, and herrings to China. My mother, she was pregnant, and they were walking, it was very hot, she was Norwegian, she didn't like the climate particularly, it was very sweaty and humid. And in the mornings before he went to the office, they used to walk together, because the women were meant to be beautiful and have cocktail parties and speak to the men and have a social chit-chat. Well, I can't do that. I don't want to do this. She liked the clothes, but she did not want to do this with these vacuous women. And they were walking one morning in a big field of Guayang, of fodder crop, by a drainage canal, and she saw this old man doing something. And she said, I had electric shocks going up and down my back. I had never seen anything like it in my life before. What was it? I have to learn this. His body is transparent. He has light going through him. Who is he? And everybody in the cocktail party said, oh yes, that's very interesting. How fun, that's exciting. Nobody knew. Nobody could teach one. Women, Western women, were certainly not touched by Chinese men. And a lot of the arts were internal secret arts at that time, and not taught. And women, as I said yesterday to somebody, women very often still had bound feet. Symbol of beauty and prison, being a prisoner inside your body. But then they had another escape. My sister was born, and the communists erupted, and the nationalists there was a small fight near my parents' house. A nationalist soldier was injured, wounded, shot, and so my mother lay on top of him and pretended to be giving birth to my sister, and so they got him to hospital, but then they had to leave. They had to leave, and it was very difficult. In those days, of course, everybody had servants, that was what it was. And they had some wonderful, wonderful family who I grew up with. They were my friends, I played with them. And they helped my parents get out, because the communist threw everything down, trapped on it in the mud, no nappies, no food for my sister, no nothing. And our number one boy, Adi, kept her alive until they got to Hong Kong. And in Hong Kong, my mother said, I must learn, find me someone who can teach me what this is, because nobody knew. There were Chinese people in Chinatown and in China practicing, but no Europeans. Perhaps in America, perhaps other places, but not there. And particularly where she was. And eventually, I can remember, as a little girl, these two old men, one very old man who was in his 80s, and then Tolok Pan, who was in his 70s, coming to the house with pigtails and skull caps and robes. And they looked at my mother and said, what do you do? And she showed her her dance. And she began to learn, they began to teach her. And for her, it was a process of de-becoming, of forgetting everything in her own body, in her own training, to try and find her center. And it was very difficult. Very difficult. And as we know, there are many, as I say, there are 10,000 things. Styles, forms, you all do different things. And we know that there are forms are largely, styles are largely named after people, so Yang, after Yang, and my lineage is through the Yang style. So my mother's teacher was second generation taught by Zofia. And so that is what she learnt. And because she had this background in psychology, philosophy, movement, and because she was a woman, and because she couldn't speak Chinese, and because they didn't do it 70 years ago, and because they didn't speak about it, she learned very little about internal form, or anything to do with any martial side of the Tai Chi Chuan. She learned it as movement with symbolism and imagery. And that's what she explored. So when we came back to, so that was her the original lineage, and here was her first teacher, Choi Hok Pan, who I remember very much as a child coming to our house there. He'd been teaching in America, so he was very smart with his tie and his shoes. And that was who was her major teacher, Choi Kaman, who I also learnt with I went to San Francisco to learn with him as well later. And of course, we also have German Cheng, who I also studied with. Here she is in Hong Kong, looking very ill, because she became very ill. We came back to the West because she was ill, and you can see she is not well. And she began to teach at the Centre for Contemporary Dance in London, the place. But the form, she learnt it, and just as Thomas was saying this morning, she learnt it and it became empty because she was practicing just because she knew it. And she had nothing renewing her inside. And she said, there must be something more. I know what I can do. And she thought at the time my body was quite beautiful, maybe doing this. And then she thought, this is not it. And so she read and read and read and looked and studied and looked at art and Chinese poetry and Chinese literature and Chinese philosophy, and looked at the names within the Tai Chi Chuan. The Yang style, long form. And she thought about it a lot. And she thought, she looked at the writings of various of the Tai Chi backgrounds. So she looked at Chan San Fan and saying, this is the way one should move. I'm sure you all know this, particularly with what you do. Particularly let the postures be without breaks or holds, hollows or projections. Move the motion everybody has been doing this these last 2 days. She's rooted in the feet, released through the legs, and controlled by the waist. But what do the names mean? And she looked at the long form is in 3 parts. And each part ends with a movement, carry the tiger to your arms, carry the tiger in your arms and return to the mountain. And she looked and thought, this is everybody's universal journey. This is a journey. This is a journey from birth to death that is told within the movements and images in the form. So when we start from nothing, and we have our childhood in the first part, the first 2 sequences of the form, and we end carrying our tiger. Our tiger is ourself. The tiger can be both yin and yang, but you take it to the mountain. So the tiger is an ambivalent creature in Chinese, sometimes yin, sometimes yang. The mountain is stillness. So after your first phase of life, you rest and take yourself to rest. So these symbols became more and more important. And there are 3 parts, there are 13 sequences, and the sequences end with the bird's beak. The bird has many meanings, many types of bird in the form, and the bird's beak is a weapon. But it is also in a story, it is like the end of a paragraph. This is the end of a chapter. This is the end of a paragraph. So I've done something, and I have the bird's beak. The bird, Chuanzi says, the bird sings his song, and then he closes his beak. So you've done your little song, and you close your beak on that phase of your form of your life. And it comes 7 times. We have many birds. The white bird spreads its wings. The white bird is the crane or the stork. And the stork does, the crane is the symbol of being a conduit. So the bird can take inspiration, pass it through its body, and come out through its other wing. It is also the symbol of fidelity, the mating dance of the birds. Have you ever seen images of the mating dances of the cranes or the storks? They have fantastic, the men do a fantastic display, but so do the ladies with their wings doing all of this to be faithful to each other. So the white bird is a very much inspiration. You're asking for inspiration to come through you in your journey. Aha, the monkey. And we all have monkeys all the time. So the second part of the form starts with pushing away the monkey. And the monkey is a fine fellow. He is funny. He is a trickster. And he needs to be pushed away. You can't squash him. You need to push him away. So step back to repulse the monkey. You push away all these monkey thoughts and you bring in clean new chi. With a turning of your finger, you bring in new chi, clean chi every time. And you push him away 5 times, but that doesn't stop him. He comes back again. In the third part of your life, you have more monkeys. I'm sure you always have monkeys. I have so many. And you have to push away these monkeys. And the movement of the monkey is really important, where you're turning, where you're sinking. But you push him away in order to find inspiration. And then what happens? You find inspiration with the white bird. And then you go down for the golden needle. Well, what is the golden needle? The golden needle is a yang symbol, golden yang. And there is a story of a monk sewing the most beautiful, beautiful tapestry. And all his students said, oh, come on, how did you do that? And he said, I have the golden needle. And they said, well, we want one. Where do we have it? I threw it in the sea, find it for yourself. So you have to find your golden needle. What is it that turns you on? What is it that you want to do in life? And that is looking for the golden needle. And when you come up, you shoot out that arrow. And that is it. It's called fan through the back or shooting out the arrow. And here's archery. There's many of you do practice archery. And this is the most wonderful move. Shooting it out. I'm sure when you were younger, maybe now still now, you have a chance in later life, you found it. And was it salsa dancing? Was it designing a bridge? Was it making an IT program? Was it gardening? Was it having a baby? What was it that you did that made you fail $100? But you still have, and when you have shot out your arrow, you think, hey, this is me. And then you have, there is no beginning, there is no end. And there is no beginning, there is no end to it. Hey, you're a microcosm in the macrocosm, you're not that great. You just have to think that you are with the where you are with the flow. And this little ego that's coming up with you shooting out the arrow, what is this? These are some wonderful archers shooting out an arrow. And that I saw that was Kyudo in Japan, just in a village, with these wonderful archers with their long bows just leaning down, coming up and shooting out the arrow in one move. It was amazing, amazing thing. Archery. Here's my mother towards the end of her life. She's in her 80s in the Scottish Highlands, just playing her tai chi with there is no beginning, there is no end. So that is the beginning part, the second part of the form. And then what happens, you really do it. You have the kicking section, and that's when you have to actually use everything you've got. Because what's the point of having all that inspiration unless you use it? How do you spread your joy? Are you teachers? Are you creative? How do you create? How do you do this? And I think we all find different ways. It could be because we're a very good accountant. It could be because we are good with our hands, we have healing hands. It could be because we are a good parent. How do you actually use all of this? And this is the most wonderful sculptor, Julie, Taiwanese sculptor, who has these astonishing, huge bronze sculptures here, absolutely amazing, of the kicking section, just. Then you come to confront the tiger. And what is the tiger? The tiger is one of those mythical beasts in Chinese, but it is you. And so you have to actually, the chuan, control, is looking after your tiger. Is your tiger in charge of you, or are you in charge of your tiger? And you twist the tiger's ears, and you twist the tiger's ears, and you eyeball the tiger, you go eyeball to eyeball with the tiger, you are fighting your tiger through the second part of the form. And then you come back and take him nicely to the mountain for a little rest. The third part of the form starts in a different way. So here we have to confront the heavenly horses. And it is difficult for Western and Eastern iconography and symbols because in the West, we like horses and kill dragons. And in the East, they were frightened of the horse was saber-toothed and had big horses and big teeth. They were frightened of him. He came from the north. He was associated with the Mongol hordes and the Tartars who invaded China. So they were scared of horses. And what always has to happen, that the stallion particularly is a very male figure, and the gentle mare had to come and breathe through her nostrils and tame the stallion. So you have to be so gentle that you can part the wild horse's mane. That is the beginning image of the third part of the form, which is our older years. Some of you are in your middle parts, maybe in your heart parts, you are all in the middle section of your life, but some of us are in our third part of our lives. And there we have to actually think about what happens next. Everybody's story, we are born, we live, we die. And the third part of the form is about how do you grow older? How do you change as you grow older when you can't do this anymore necessarily? You know, you might be able to, but you can't. So how does that happen? Here are some more horses. And how you do this is very wonderful. You change. As you grow older, you transform and you let go. Letting go is very difficult. How do you let go of all the things that are important? How do you let go of love and let your loved ones stand beside you, not have to hold them? How do you let go of learning? My brain is really important. I have all these facts, I have all these books, I have libraries. How do you let go and find out what wisdom is inside? How do you let go of material things? How do you let go? I mean, I deal with building conservation, I deal with old buildings, I repair old buildings, and I teach about plastering, pointing, carpentry, metalwork. That's what I did to anyhow. How do you let go of all that knowledge? Maybe not. Maybe it's not there anymore. Maybe you love clothes. How do you let go of your clothes, or your shoes? In your old days, it used to be cigarettes. How do you stop smoking or alcohol? How do you transform? You don't have to let go of it. You have to not be dependent. You have to stand aside. And that is this wonderful image of the snake. And the snake transforms. The snake sheds his skin. And maybe some of you are at the stage of shedding your skin. If you are being ill, sometimes you have to be very humble and let go of being in charge and independent. That is a big letting go. So the snake creeps down for the first time, is his head, and he sheds his skin and becomes the golden rooster standing on one leg. And he comes again, and the rooster comes again. So you have shed your skin, you have transformed, but you're still alive, you have to still carry on. So what happens next? More jolly monkeys. So the monkeys come back again. So in the long form, you have to push them away again. There are more monkeys. There you are, all spiritual and beautiful and empty and lovely. And they're still jolly old monkeys. So you have to let go of your monkeys again. Then in the third part of the form, there is exploring the whole of the world around you. Maybe you've not just been inside. So there is an image of the four corners of the earth. The Chinese believed the earth was square and was like the feet of a tortoise. So the tortoise, the tortoise's shell was the heaven, the tortoise's body was the earth, and his feet were standing in the ocean. And with his four corners, you explore the whole of your being and the world. But it's also an image of weaving. So those who have done weaving, the warp and the weft, and it is Guan Yin, the goddess of mercy, who is taken from a Buddhist, who is taken actually from India as Bodhisattva. She is actually not an original Chinese goddess, she is actually Indian. But she is weaving a tapestry between heaven and earth for humans to be able to go up. So you are exploring the four corners that the Guan Yin allows you to do, and you go to each corner. And again, the little ego kicks up. There. You know, I've got all of this. So what do we have again? There is no beginning. There is no end. And then we have in the long form we have various. Let's see where we go. So here we have the tortoise, And the tortoise with the snake. So here we have a wonderful snake in Chinese opera, and another snake here. We finally have to let go. This is skipping over their other sequences. The final sequence of the form is another letting go. This is preparing for death. And so every day when we go through the form, if we practice daily or whenever we practice play, you go from life to death. And you can think of it in so many ways. You can think about where is my dantian, where is my breath, where is my hand, where is my waist, or where am I in this, where am I on my journey? Am I ready for this? And if you prepare and go through, maybe going to Switzerland to take a pill to die is not so bad. maybe dying loses its fear. A lot of this is about losing fear. So the letting go is also fear. Fear, anger, hatred, negativity, you let go in order to let light come into you. So your final disappearance should just be light. We are heavy, we become light. And the light leaves our body as we die. And so that movement, the final movement of the form, is the second snake in the Yang style long form. It may be different in other ones, but these symbols are universal. So in the form, the snake creeps down a second time. So here's the snake's head. And he sheds his skin, and he comes up to grasp the 7 stars. So you're going heavenwards. And you step back and you prepare to ride your tiger. So all the way through the form, you've been fighting yourself and fighting your tiger and fighting your ego. And now you're at peace, you're at one with your tiger. And he's like a pussycat. You can ride your tiger. So you ride your tiger. And then the last thing you do in life is pick up the lotus flower with your foot. And the lotus flower is the symbol of beauty and eternity. So you pick up the lotus flower with your foot, and then you actually gather, you fist both hands, and what you are doing here, the Chinese have an idea that you have 2 souls. In the West we have 1 soul. You have 2 souls, the Hun and the Po. And the Hun, you let go, and you let go of your spirit, so that is your spirit. And your spirit goes up as light. And your Po, your body, goes down to earth, to decay. And then you come back, and you return to the mountain. And so that interpretation of, it's another layer. The Tai Chi Chuan is like all these delicious cakes you have here. So many layers of different things. And there's layers of interest, layers of knowledge, layers of fantastic aspects inside the form that can think about your whole body, your mind, your spirit, everything. But that interpretation gives an extra dimension as to what you're doing and why you're doing it. And I think particularly the 3 phases of life, and wherever you are, wherever you come from, it's what we all go through. And that is what my mother worked on during her life. And I think I told some of you at wherever it was, that when she was dying, she lay in bed and she just went with her hand like this and went out. There was a window and she just went like that and died. She'd been preparing all her life for death, and the last few years particularly. And it was very, very beautiful, and it was extraordinary because at that moment, the phones were ringing, and my nephew from Vietnam said, she has died. And my, another 4 brother-in-law said, "Woman is dead," and she was dying, and they all knew her light had passed. It was extraordinary, an extraordinary moment, and it was very, very beautiful. So here we actually, we're peaceful with our tiger. At the end, we actually are happy, and when we have ridden our tiger, we are at one with our tiger. And here is the lotus flower. So picking up the lotus with your foot, and that seems extraordinary, but the lotus in China can grow up on a stalk, so it isn't so difficult actually to pick it with your foot. The thought, you can see it grows up. And this was done by one of my students, a lovely picture. She did lots of Tai Chi cartoons. And she did this lovely one too, also, of this one of tiger and monkey. This was a lovely picture, but tiger pictures are very nice, the pussycats. So when my mother died, she was cremated, and we parcelled her up, and we threw her to Norway, off the cliffs of the Orkney Islands, north of Scotland. So we threw her, and these are all the Norwegian cousins and everyone else, and we had a little parcel, all of her, and we threw her off the edge, and I showed the last sequence of the form before we threw her away to Norway. One of her students, when she was in her 80s, was a lovely man called Frank Woods, and he wrote this book, which there was some of. It's about her. She also actually wrote a beautiful, really wise book herself, which is out of print, but I think, as St. Thomas, I must reprint it, which is called Looking for the Golden Needle. And this is a very wise, small book. It is not heavy, it is light, and it is filled with light, and it has many of the quotations from the I Ching and from Lao Tzu, Chuang Tzu in it, as well as the interpretation of the allegorical journey. Frank's book was more about her life. This is more about her interpretation, and we will get it reprinted. We must, because it's a little pearl of wisdom. It is very fun. But don't get hung up, guys. Don't get hung up. Yeah, Tai Chi's so relaxing, but this makes me sick. Yeah, repulsive. Don't think too much about it. You're all very beautiful, you're all very perfect. When you're doing your form, you're totally centered, but don't get too serious. And this one, I have in my toilet. I have this hanging over the toilet. I just think that is so wonderful, that one. So, that is an American cartoon. So there you are. So that is a little bit about another way of looking at the Tai Chi Chuan that might give you some other kind of insight into your practice of push hands and centering, but also what the meanings could be. And before my mother began to teach in the West, she consulted the I Ching. She used the I Ching a lot. We always have the I Ching every time. Shall I go to music lessons? Let's ask the I Ching. We got very bored with the I Ching as children. But before she started to teach, she asked the I Ching, should she teach? Was she ready to teach, and should she teach? And she got the hexagram for the cauldron. And as you know, some of you may have consulted the I Ching, and they're always static lines and moving lines, so what it is and what it might become. And the cauldron was the Tai Chi Chuan itself. And it was empty, but it had pheasant fat in it. And the fat needed to be used and filled and sent out. And so she interpreted that the Tai Chi Chuan was ready to be taught in the West. And she didn't feel bad about using her interpretation. But to go back right to the beginning, she was a woman. Many of you here have practiced martial arts as women, but that was not possible then. Go back 70 years, go back 80 years, that was not possible. And she was filled with this. She didn't need that. So there, as I say, as I started, there are 10,000 things. There you go.